This is the DRF Players Podcast. Here are your hosts, Peter Thomas Fornatel and Jonathan Kinchin.
Hello and welcome to the DRF Players Podcast. This is show 362, the August 28th, 2018 edition. It's a Tuesday, and it's not just any Tuesday. It's the Tuesday after the Travers Stakes, a racing day, which, like many on the NYRA circuit, has evolved in recent years to be more than just the biggest day of the Saratoga meet. It is a mini summer edition of the Breeders' Cup, really, and there are a lot of implications coming out of this plethora of stakes races that we are going to be discussing over the course of the next hour, along with I don't know what else we're going to talk about. We may get into some Twitter etiquette today, but some funny stuff going on the Twitter machine we might want to get into. It should be fun. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you from the Little House on the East Side, second to last show this summer from the Little House on the East Side of Saratoga. Good news for all you bingo players out there. We are odds on to be giving out a bingo square today, that little one that says Perrin/Austin interrupts, because Perrin is with me. Childcare situation didn't work out today, so she's got the headphones on and she's watching PJ Masks or something like that. But odds on to need something during the course of the show. Get those bingo cards ready. Muggsy, the handicapping Labrador, sleeping alongside on my left. Maybe we'll get a bark or two from her as well. And I'm joined for this show on the wake of his phoning it in last Friday. He's now here in person. He is out of Old Blighty and back on the planet Texas. He's the people's champion, Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
What's going on? Yeah, no, I miss you guys. It was a fun trip. It was a quick trip, and nothing. I did make one wager at a William Hill facility. I went in and tried to get cute on the first race at Saratoga. There was a favorite that was bad, and the odds were in my favor. I had some pounds left over. My buddy Robert was doing his fantasy football draft. I had nothing else to do at the pub across the street. And then I got beat by a horse that I could have never had, and I realized that the vacation is still time for the vacation to stay intact. So I didn't go back over.
So I'm shocked. You didn't play any of the gimmicks connected with the Travers Stakes?
Oh, no. This was on Sunday. I played. I did play that. I played the pick six, but not.
What have you done? Who are you, and what have you done with Jonathan?
But here, let me tell you what happened there. This was frustrating. We were in a festival. My brother played a festival, and like a big festival. Well, at those festivals, cell signal is like a no-go. So leading up to the first race of the pick six, which was the Promises Fulfilled race, I started to try to get on my phone. It wouldn't work. I started trying to use other people's phones. I tried to find the Wi-Fi, and then I found out if you go into this little tent and tell them that you're media, they'll give you your own individual Wi-Fi password that you can log, but you can't share it. You can only be on one. So I went in there and faked the funk and tricked some girl into giving me a password. So I was able to watch the races the rest of the time. But yeah, it was fun.
That's phenomenal. And I love your little dodge there. The Promises Fulfilled race, so you didn't have to remember whether it was the H. Allen Jerkins or Allen H. Jerkins. Very, very, very clever, JK. I see you over there in the planet Texas. Let's dive right into the big race of the day. It's been an unsatisfying Saratoga meet for me personally. Been some great racing, some great performances, but by and large, my troubles this meet, well documented here. The weather, well documented here. I will say this, I found it to be a tremendously satisfying Travers Stakes and Travers result. We talked so much early in the year about the potential this 3-year-old crop had. Bit of a lull throughout, obviously certainly justified some of that. A little bit of a lull throughout the middle of the year. Two pretty impressive performances, I thought, by Mendelssohn and Catholic Boy coming in strong. 104 was the winning figure on the Beyer speed figure scale. Craig Milkowski at Timeform US had it a little bit later, but I thought it gave the visual impression to match the Beyer and suggests that a couple of these 3-year-olds may yet be heard from late in 2018. Congrats to all the connections of Catholic Boy, especially John Panagot, who is a dear and old friend, racing manager for Bob LaPenta, jockey agent for Javier Castellano. Javier himself, what's that, like his 6th Travers or something crazy? And mad props to JT, Jonathan Thomas. Susan was with us as we watched the race. She bet Catholic Boy. She was rooting hard. She saw Jonathan in the winner's circle and was fondly recalling about 10 years ago or so when we roomed with him, courtesy of the Saratoga Special, and she just looked at the TV and pointed and said, "Hey, I've seen that guy in his pajamas," and got a big laugh. So couldn't have been a happier result, and it was a rare situation, one of the few times this meet, JK, where after a race there was more money in my ADW account than there was before it. I almost didn't know what was happening. It was so disorienting, but that was a nice sensation too. What did you think of this year's Travers Stakes?
I thought it was good. I mean, I think it's interesting that and maybe this is a little bit harsh, but it's interesting that 2 quote-unquote turf horses ran 1-2 and the biggest dirt race of the summer for 3-year-olds. Maybe Catholic Boy isn't a dirt horse, and maybe maybe Catholic Boy isn't necessarily a quote-unquote turf horse, and the same for Mendelssohn. He's not necessarily a turf horse. I thought that the Catholic Boy did it impressively. He kind of did exactly what he's done in his last few starts, where he was more forwardly placed than I think the Catholic Boy, the 2-year-old Catholic Boy, was. When he was ready, he took the race, and at the top of the stretch and at the quarter pole, it was kind of never in doubt that he was going to win at that point. So when you can, in a dirt race, when the race can be over that early in the race, to me, that's really the sign of a dominant performance. And like I said, at the quarter pole, it was pretty much a done deal.
I said aloud, Catholic Boy is going to win this by a long way when Mendelssohn started to come off, and you could see he was just cruising. Also notable, I think, is I do believe it was a day where ground loss mattered. I'm not going to call it a big inside bias, but I'm going to say that the ground that you lost probably was worth the distance at the end of the race at the wire. Prominent example of that we're going to get to in a little bit when we talk about one of these other races. But that, to me, makes the Catholic Boy performance a little bit more impressive even than on its face. I guess I see where you're going with the potentially cynical comment about the turf horses as a way to denigrate the quote-unquote dirt 3-year-olds, but I don't see it that way. I think that the figure was too good. I think these are 2 really good dirt horses. You look at their progression. The Triple Crown, people got to start thinking of it this way, that there's just so many horses that go through that grind to get there that whether or not you train on after, it's like a really valid question at this point. These were 2 horses, I think, all the time were handled in a way, not running these 3 races or 2 of these 3 races or whatever and bust, but handled much more carefully with an eye toward the future. They were rewarded. I think these efforts were real. And again, I'm really looking forward. I think these are players. I think these are players going forward. Your pick in the race was Mendelssohn. My initial gut was, I'm not sure if I want to go there again. The more I looked, the more I realized what the price was going to be, the more I came to your way of thinking, JK, and ended up using the horse pretty thickly at that price. Obviously, he looked a lot more like the horse we saw in Dubai, maybe adjusted for the lack of the aid of the bias, than he did in the previous form in the Dwyer. What do you think about him going forward? Is this one who's getting better and better for the O'Brien barn that could possibly be cycling up in the last half of 2019? Is Mendelssohn a player? Do you see him as, and we'll probably see him again before maybe Jockey Club Gold Cup, but just sitting from here, do you see him as a contender for the Breeders' Cup Classic?
I don't necessarily think he's getting better, just to clarify that point. I don't think he's getting better. I think he finally got what he needs, which is a forwardly placed trip on a fast track going longer than 1.1 miles. I think that's the only way he's going to be successful in American racing, because the other situations I think are going to be too difficult for him. The off track is obviously going to be a problem for him based on his performance in the Derby, which it isn't completely an indictment of his ability to get over a sloppy track, but it surely didn't go well. But more importantly, I just don't think he's going to like being in behind horses eating all of that slop. I just don't think it's something he's going to be used to, something he's going to enjoy. And in fact, it'll probably remind him of his negative run that he had in the Derby. So for me, I just think he got the situation that he needed, which was forwardly placed mile and a quarter.
No problem with him on a wet track if he can be on the front end.
He's on the front end going, but he's on the front end going 48. I don't necessarily want him in any race on the front end going 46. I don't think that's his game. I think he's a long-winded, talented animal that he's kind of one of those that you want to get that 48 half and let his stamina bring him home when the rest of them are reeling a little bit. I don't know if he's going to be the type like
the half in Dubai.
He's not going to be the diversified game on dude types where the faster he goes, the better his chances are. I don't think that's him.
But he's got more real stamina. I think some of those horses' ability, they have stamina, obviously, but as we've talked about, it's that ability to put so much pressure on other horses, make them go too fast. I agree. Mendelssohn, to me, feels like more of a dirt stayer that you just want to run efficiently. I wouldn't rule out his ability to continue to improve, though, and be able to cut out somewhat faster fractions and still have that be within himself and still have it be still consider it efficiently. Now, the come-home times weren't like eye-popping or anything in the race. It'll be interesting to look as all the figures come out and break down this race a bit more into its component parts before making an assessment out of him going forward. But he might look real good in the race in New York, depending on, obviously what other speed shows up. But have you seen anything about potential starters for the Jockey Club Gold Cup to this point?
I haven't seen anything, but I would imagine there's a diversify in the mix there. And so I think that's enough. That's enough to
hard for him.
That's enough to learn what we need to learn about him. And here's the thing, a lot of these 3-year-olds, we get to see him a bunch. We've seen Good Magic do a lot of things. We've seen him saw him in the Derby, the Preakness. We saw him, I believe Good Magic ran in the Bluegrass. We saw a bunch of things from Good Magic. We didn't see a lot of things. We saw some things from Justify. In the years past, we've seen a lot of things from American Pharoah, a lot of things from Bayern, all these different horses that were running in the Classic. We've seen them do a lot of different scenarios. We haven't seen Mendelssohn do very much. And so I don't really know exactly what he is yet. And I'm looking forward to seeing him running in another prep here so that we can get another line item of information of what he is and what kind of animal he is, and moving forward have a better idea. If he shows up, if he trains up to the Breeders' Cup, I'm not gonna know what to do with him because I just don't feel like I have enough information.
I don't think that's the plan. And I will say this definitively, it does feel like between his ability to stalk and pounce and get the distance and just the comparative races they ran in the Travers, Catholic Boy would be the one of the two I would want going forward. Do you agree?
Yes. I know more about Catholic Boy. I know his resume is clear to me. He is a gutsy, tough racehorse. That's his resume. Like, I know that about him. I still don't know what Mendelssohn is.
Fair enough. Let's talk about some of the disappointments of the race. I'd say in the little disagreement we had about whether or not it was a disadvantage to run in the Haskell and the Travers, I'll take credit for a big win there based on the stinker turned in by Good Magic. Unless I missed something, was there any excuse for this run, or do we think it was just asking him to do a very difficult task at this time of the year for a horse who'd already been pretty well battle-tested for a barn that often does better with more time between?
Yeah, I think you could probably give it to the Chad Brown. I would rather say it's the Chad Brown more time in between than the Haskell to the Travers.
What else do you need to see from the Haskell and Travers to understand that it's very, very difficult to do? It got American Pharoah beat, for goodness sake. It got this horse who couldn't be off the board running last. I want to hear you defend this position a little bit.
I think it's like, it's 5 weeks between the Haskell and the Travers, right?
I can't remember if it's 4 or 5. Do you have it in front of you? I'm somewhere else on my computer, and I don't want to hammer on the keys.
Yeah, no,
You're getting a little wonky on us, JK. You're
do that thing where I talk, about nothing for a couple. Yeah, I'm in the little house on the east side, which can sometimes get a little funny acting. I'm going to defer to you on that.
No, I don't think so. I'm plugged in. I don't think that's me. But the DRF offices in New York are always a likely culprit when it comes to this stuff. Well, anyway, did you find the answer?
Yeah. So yes, Good Magic was July 29th. So what was that? How many weeks is that? That's going to be 4, right?
Yeah, that's 4.
Okay. I guess for me, the problem I'm having with the whole idea, and I know there's different circumstances, but horses run in the final Derby preps, which are 4 weeks out from the Derby at 1 mile and an eighth, and then show up in the first Saturday in May at 1 mile and a quarter and win that race. So I know there's other factors with improving horses and
totally different. It's a different time of the year, and most of them have already been through the grind of that. I'll blindly go winner in next year's Travers. I'll tell you that right now. But we'll just agree to disagree. I don't think it's interesting for the listeners for us to go any deeper. Any other thoughts on the Travers? Any other horses you'd want to take out of this?
No, I mean, I thought Wonder Godot was bad, and I didn't expect her to run well, but I surely didn't expect her to run that poorly. So I was a little bit disappointed with how she ran, but I do think it was cool. I will say, I do think it was cool. I don't know if you saw on Twitter, Mark Cassidy retweeted a little video of Irad, giving her a slap on the neck, like a good girl slap on the neck as she crossed the line, finishing last. And he pointed out that he's seen riders do that to a winning horse, but it doesn't always happen to the horse who is finishing last. And it just reminds me, and we've talked about it before on the show, those two young men and Jose and Irad and I know also Manny Franco. I'm just lumping those two together because they're brothers, but man, those kids do it right. They understand the business. They understand the equine athletes, and I've always been really impressed with how they carry themselves, and this is just another example of it.
I agree. That is class all the way. Didn't expect much from Wonder Godot in the spot, but I think back more realistically spotted. Obviously, I've been against her many times, and many times she's proved me wrong. She's tough. She's cool. Hopefully, this didn't take too much out of her, and she'll be back in short order. I think we probably should talk about Gronkowski, the other big disappointment in the race. Really bet to 3-1. Did brush the gate coming out of there. Sometimes that can have more of an effect than you'd think. Knock a wind out of a horse, something like that. But I don't know. I didn't look that bad looking at it again. Hard to know. What do you make of him now? Talk about a horse we don't really know much about. What do you make of Gronkowski going forward?
I don't know. I think maybe that eye-catching move in the Belmont might have been misleading. Maybe the rest of them were just kind of slowing down when he was running and made that move. I'm reaching for something. I don't know. He was poor. He was training well up to that. I guess he didn't necessarily get the pace he needed and probably wasn't on the racetrack that he needed. I know that the connections expected him to run well. I had heard, rumblings before that Chad thought he was going to run huge. And so I just guess he just kind of fooled us a little bit. Maybe the dirt, maybe it's that situation where, you're the first time you ask them to do something for the first time is the best time they're going to do it. Whether it's like a turf horse trying dirt or whatever, or a sprinter going long, the first time is like, they realize like, oh no, that I was sore after that. I'm not doing that again. I mean, maybe it was that, but no real excuse. There's no reason that he should have finished behind Trigger Warning.
Right.
You
do hear that story. You do hear that story sometimes about horses. Certainly when it comes to ground, they'll say sometimes that UK or Irish horses they'll run real well on the hard ground or the firm ground once, and then I think it's the logic, like you said, JK. They don't it didn't feel so good after, and they don't always give the best efforts the second time on. There could be something like that. It's an interesting narrative to consider. He'll be a tough one to evaluate when he comes back, but he's certainly in the right hands to rebound. How about Dwayne Lucas and Bravazzo JK getting third and messing up what would have been a beautiful podcast trifecta between Catholic Boy, Mendelssohn, and King Zachary? What can you say about his performance?
He's just that horse that always kind of shows up and like is in the is in the mix somewhere. I'm not sure. He feels like who was that horse a couple years ago that ran second in the Derby that Asmussen had? Robbie Alvarado rode him on that Golden Rail. Anyways, he feels like that horse is like, next summer we're going to be joking that Bravazzo still hasn't won a race yet. Right? His last race he ran was in February of 2018. He's just like one of those kind of pluggies types. He's quality. He sticks around. I'd love to own him, but I'm not sure he's going to win any of the races in which he's put in. So gutsy type.
Not a horse that you want to leave out when you're building superfectas, however. Yeah, a tough prior.
Looking at Lee. Sorry.
Yes.
I didn't have to look that up. It came back in my brain.
Did he end up winning another race, Looking at Lee?
He did, but I think it was like 2 years later, and it might have actually been like Belmont or Saratoga or something. I'll look right now.
That one I have.
Yeah, it took a while. He finally won at Churchill. He finally won at Churchill actually on Derby Day, or on May 5th of this year. And the last time he had won before that was August 6th of 2016. So it was almost like 2 years in between.
Let's move on to some of the other races on this Travers undercard. I was happy with the discussion of the race, the sword dancer that we had in the morning. I had Mike Watchmaker and Nick Tamaro, and I was happy that I didn't. But I bet the race initially. I wasn't alive in anything at this point, and I decided not to go back in. I saw Glorious Empire. I saw the idea that Funtastic last time was maybe the accidental rabbit, and he would be loose. Then I saw the first quarter and thought, oh boy, it's not going to be Glorious Empire. And then as he not only leveled out the fractions, but ended up slowing them down to a point where the 1.25 miles was coded blue on Timeform US. I'm just at a point now, JK, where in these Saratoga turf races, even if there are multiple speed horses signed on, I'm going to at least throw in the one that I think will make the lead, who's a decent price, because we've just seen it too often over the course of the last few years. And this division, think about this division, these races that take place typically before the big 3-year-old race on the day, on major race days, whether it's Belmont, Kentucky Derby, or up here for the Travers. And think about some of the prices and some of the chaos we've seen. I think that's not a coincidence that we've seen so many price horses win in this division. I'm just going to try to be, obviously it'll be different if I have some real key horse. But even then, I think I'm going to take some percent of my money and take any long shot I can make any case for, even if it's fanciful, and try to get the next $32 winner of the turf race for elders before the big 3-year-old race, because it just seems amazing over the course of the last 5 years how many of them have gotten the job done. Glorious Empire, the one here, figure comes back 127 on the Timeform scale. Give me your thoughts on this year's Sword Dancer.
2 years ago, the world was a better place. But one of the other reasons it was a better place was because we had horses like Flincher and Visadero that just won all these races. So it was just easier. You have to deal with all this nonsense. Look, they can run the race again, and I just can't design it where, like, even, I don't know. I get it. I just assume that if I'm going to get beat by an inferior horse loose on the lead, he's going to open up more. He's only kind of clear by like a length the entire way around there. Couldn't get past him. High Happy was close enough defensively. Bigger Picture was a no factor. Sadler's Joy didn't even like really do that annoying thing where he comes running late and hits the board. It just was a weirdly run race, and it's tough. I think the hardest thing about these races that make them so difficult and make us have problems with horses that we completely miss is, I think that the ground is just different in all of these different places. And I don't think that we do it in America do a great job differentiating between the types of grounds that these races are being run on. And I think the fractions can sometimes be misleading to whether a race was fast or slow. And I think it's just kind of an inaccuracy that leads to these confusing moments. And it's hard to try to account for. There's no way to really know the ground situation. And so that's kind of what I try to account for, because I don't know what else to do. I mean, if they ran the race again, I'd have a hard time picking Glorious Empire.
I definitely feel like he should have been. It might be a race where I had 75% of them with something, but I feel like he could have been a legit B, a value B at the price, with the idea that Fantastic not really a pure speed horse and that Jose was going to grab, which he did, and let him wing around there. I feel like I missed doing a little bit more with Glorious Empire. I get your point about the ground, and I agree. There are some tricks to that, even if you're just looking at the old school variant in the daily racing form about how fast or slow the turf was playing that day, let alone a more sophisticated variant that you might have access to. That's one way to get a little more of a line on which type of soft turf, how slow or fast the ground is. But I think it's funny that you mentioned it with Glorious Empire, because he won in the bog last time and in the firm this time. So I'm just curious, why did you think of that ground situation in this race?
I guess it's not so much this race. I'm just saying, I think at times we, unlike dirt racing, we develop these prejudices towards horses based on previous performances that I think those performances are not being evaluated accurately. And I'm not just saying by most, but maybe I'm just talking to myself. Maybe this is like my come to Jesus meeting where I need to like reevaluate that. But I just feel like these races are so trip oriented, and so the intricacies of grass racing are, to me, there's so many more things that can go right or wrong, that I just think that a lot of times, unlike a dirt race where I can have an opinion that a horse like Promises Fulfilled is the most likely winner, and regardless of the situation, you can't have that strong of opinion in these grass races because there's so many different variables. Like I mentioned earlier at the top about Flincher. I mean, he got beat in a race at Saratoga by the Todd Pletcher horse with the gray silks and the maroon hat. So it happens. It happens because there's so many variables in turf racing, and I think that I have to do a better job accounting for chaos in turf racing. I will never change my opinion that I'm not going to account for chaos in racing. It's too formful and it makes too much sense. I probably need to open up my mind a little bit more to accounting for chaos in turf racing.
That's probably smart. I don't think that race was up here. I think that was Belmont on the
You're
bottom.
right. You're right. It was Belmont.
Help me remember the name of that horse. Remember, and the Fletcher horse that won on the bog ran up here and was supposed to be the next coming. And I found some crazy price in the UK and ended up being one of the more frustrating beats. Ecto, right?
Ecto. Yep. Ecto.
Oh,
You're right.
Then he came back and stuck it to me again. I like your come to Jesus meeting. Brother Kinchin, will you step into the water? I think you're right, man. These turf races do not play to the selection-oriented style. They play to a value player style. That's why you see so many contest players. And I'm going to even take a little bit of a leap and go even a little bit farther and say so many contest players who typically do even better in mythical contests than live bankroll love the turf racing. And I came up with a new big day workflow idea, JK, and I've done this in the past, and it's just something I need to get back to, where I do a 2-stage process actually a 3-stage process with these races on big days. I go through, we outline the process in detail in Betting with an Edge with Mike Maloney. I come up with my ability figure for each horse. I come up with my race design for the race as a whole. Then I go through and I look at the race in terms of letter grades, A, B, C, X, and maybe some other gradations in between there. There might be some C minuses, there might be some A pluses, etc. And here's the part that I've been missing the last couple of years. Then you make 100% odds line out of the thing. You go ahead and you put the number, and you should correct it and make it add up to 100, that at which that horse will be valued. And I think especially in a race like this, that would have guided my betting decisions onto the right horse. Just because there were horses who I liked who were clear A's, like Sadler's Joy, too short at that number. And if you have sort of the letter grade and the number, you can sort of follow it along and know, hey, maybe that's a horse you're going to still want in picks. He's such a likely winner, but he ain't where the value is. And I think that type of process is something that I'm going to force myself to do, hopefully not just in turf races, though I feel like it can be particularly effective there, but in dirt races as well. I know it's not your style, but what do you think of it as an idea for someone else to try?
No, I used to do it. I actually, on one of my bookmarked pages on my computer, still to this day, is a it's not coming up, of course, I can't. It's like this fair odds chart that like gives you the odds of the odds of like what percentage, if a horse has a 25% chance of winning, like what the odds are, taking into account take out and all that stuff. So no, I used to do that, and I just kind of got away from it. But I think there's probably a world in which it makes sense to do it. I think it just anything that you can do that makes you dive deeper only gives you a better understanding for what it is you're doing. I mean, a lot of the things that we do, it's to familiarize yourself with the race. I know like our buddy Nick Tamero, he just has some things he does every time. He goes in on his DRF PTs and he circles the points of call that have blue or red on Timeform US. He circles them in blue and in red. So when he's looking at his DRF form, he's gonna naturally, see those things that I don't think that he could. I don't think that Nick would struggle if he didn't do it. But I think it probably helps him have a better understanding of what's going on. And it seems like a tedious part of the workflow that may or may not be necessary from time to time. But I think the more that you can do, the more of a better understanding you get about what you're about to wager on.
Especially for cash betting, I think it makes sense. But really contests too. I mean, I guess in live bankroll contests, it's different. You famously made some of these large bets on shorties, and I don't believe they were poor value wagers. Maybe they would have been poor value wagers outside of the contest, but in the contest where you're standing to make all this extra money, they still make sense on the game within a game. However, in your cash betting, this is the kind of safeguard I think that probably, now that you mentioned that you had success with it, maybe you and I should both look about doing as we go forward, at least on some of these big days, just as another thing to do, another level at which to look at it. Sometimes it can be too easy to make bets. You know what I mean? And when you have numbers there in black and white to guide you, it's just going to encourage you to make better decisions. Is that fair?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's definitely the case. And another part of Brother Kinston for the day that I probably need to realize is that on these big days, I get so familiar with the horses that are involved, and I get so familiar with who they are. I think this is another example of this turf situation where, like, I become a little bit too sure from time to time, and I lean a little too hard on my opinion, and I fall a little bit too hard into the pool of I'm going to play what I think is going to happen and not what could or I hope happens. And I think that there's an opportunity from time to time within a sequence to deviate from those rules. And I think, I think that as a whole, I'm not going to change the way that I approach it. But I think there is opportunities in certain sequences where you can do that. And like you said, it wasn't Glorious Empire was not hard to find in terms of designing the race. It was pretty stinking clear from the inside. He was going to be on the lead. He might have had some pressure, but he was going to be on. And so there was always an opportunity for him to have run the way that he did, and for him to go off at 15-1 and not to have a single piece on him in a situation like that is a little bit ridiculous if I'm being honest with myself. And the other part about it is if you look at who else I used from a defensive standpoint in there, it makes me even more angry. Like I had a small piece on High Happy, who I despise, and a small piece on Spring Quality, who I told myself I wasn't going to use. Right. And then the horse that projects to be loose from a guy who has a borderline obsession with speed horses, I don't even include.
It's not borderline. It's an obsession, JK. We've talked many times. Your form study parlor is a no-closer zone. But let me ask you this, and we're staying longer on this race than I planned, and I know this has devolved from a podcast about horse racing into sort of a dual therapy session, but I think players will hopefully enjoy an aspect of that. If I told you, if you knew before the race that Jose was going to grab out of the gate on Fantastic, what would have been fair odds on Glorious Empire? That's the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, you really thought it was that unlikely that an Ortiz brother on the grass at Saratoga, much as we like the guys, not knocking him, but we've certainly seen the grab routine on turf racing enough over the course of the last few years. How likely was that really to happen? Pretty likely.
Yeah, no, I think it was obvious that was going to happen, but I just didn't think, it was one of those things where I think probably mentally you get a little too cute with the jockey's dilemma, and I felt like although they would be loose, Julian Leparoux, who 2 weeks ago people wanted to throw off the top of the grandstand for rating heart to heart, I didn't think he was gonna be like that loose. I just thought he was gonna do the deal where he pops and holds him and then invites everyone else. He did everyone out of the race and got the job done.
He got out of there. It was a great ride, actually. Got out of there. He did everything. Used the speed as an advantage and then backed it down enough to have plenty left at the finish. Enough on the Sword Dancer. Lots more races to talk about and only 23 minutes left on today's show. Let's move on to the Forgo. I was alluding before to a race where ground loss really mattered. Nothing against Whitmore. Super cool horse. Super happy to see him get this grade 1. I think it's well-deserved. Hard-trying horse. Very cool horse. But he wins by a length and a half. City of Light traveled 30 feet farther than him on a track, again, that I believe was worth at least what the ground loss was. Who do you think ran the better race, JK?
City of Light. Good for Whitmore. He's a quality animal, and he actually made me smart. I think I tweeted a long time ago that I said, I don't know. I saw someone else tweeted under it, but I said that he was a grade 1 type sprinter, and then he wasn't one for a really long time, and then he finally became one. But look, I didn't use him at all. I was, like I said, I was single to City of Light. So City of Light was super wide. He was like in the 7 path.
Yeah.
And I'm not even
only 30 feet. I checked the Trackus and it was plus 31, and that would have been the minimum I would have accepted that it could have possibly been. It looked a lot more than that.
Well, the tricky thing about that is when you watch the head-on of the race, he is wide the entire way, but you got to remember, I'm not reminding you of this, I'm just saying out loud, and on the backstretch and the straightaway, you're not losing any ground. So it just gave this impression that he was like super wide the entire time, but it was really only on the turn, Now in a 2-turn race, it would have been like 64 feet, it would have been crazy, right? But he lost a lot of ground. I saw some people knocking Irad's ride, and look, I'm not really sure what Irad was supposed to do. You're on the best horse. You break from the far outside, and everybody inside of you is running. We're going to do take back and get stuck in behind there with this big lumbering horse who's a 2-time grade winner at 7 furlongs.
If he did anything wrong, and I'm not saying that he did, but if he did, if you were to, let's say we had a time machine and we went back and could give Erad instructions before the race, go to the lead. You're the best speed. Just blow them up. Ground loss matters today. Horses haven't been coming wide and winning, though, of course, the filly in the previous race did, which I think was just an exception and a huge performance that we'll get to. But, I mean, I'm not saying he did anything wrong. I like the idea of the ride. It just didn't quite work out. But I think if you had to do it over again, you just go straight to the front.
Yeah, the pace was quick enough, though. It felt quick enough that if he would have gone any faster, he would have been that guy who, and he got beat. He would have gotten criticized for doing that.
That's fair. He would have definitely pushed the fractions came out neutral on Timeform US. It would have pushed them into the red. I think it's likely he's good enough. He could have withstood the red, gotten everybody else off, and won. I think that could have happened. Look, this is just hindsight 2020. I'm not even knocking the ride. I'm just saying, as a mental exercise, let's see what we do if we had to do it again.
But let's do this. Let's do this exercise. If he gets to the 3-path or the 2-path by pressing a little bit harder, the gas a little bit harder, he's probably going to be red Timeform fractions, and he's going to get nailed by Limousine Liberal. If he goes to the lead, there's no doubt he gets nailed by Limousine Liberal, because he would go like dark red. He'd be going so fast to have gotten to the rail. He would have got nailed by Limousine Liberal, and he probably still could have got beaten by Whitmore. As good as Whitmore ran and as much ground as he saved, if City of Light would have pressed that much harder, he was going to get beat either way. I mean, it was just a bad setup, and he got an unfortunate trip that I don't think I could have really done anything different.
Interesting. I mean, it's an interesting debate. It's hard to know for me. I mean, I feel like going in, I thought it looked like an absolutely beautiful setup, and I guess maybe the cheap speed out in front held on longer than he would have liked. Maybe he thought by sitting out there, he'd have a chance to attack a little bit earlier and save some ground. But as you point out, it just didn't work out. Very good horse. He'll be heard from again later. That race came back with Whitmore with a 124 on the Timeform scale. I don't have the buyer in front of me. I've got it around here somewhere. Any other thoughts on this race? Do you have, and you don't have the figures by chance, do you?
No, I have Timeform ones. Did you say Timeform? You already said Timeform, right?
I sure did.
I have Timeform in front of me. I don't have the buyer.
Any other thoughts on that one before we move on?
No, I thought Awesome Slew kind of confirmed what we've already thought, that he might be going in the wrong direction.
Yes, I think that's definitely fair to say. The good workout threw me off. I was ready to be all against him. Ended up using him very thinly. But not the result. Not the result his backers were looking for. That's for sure.
For sure.
All right, let's see. I've got it here now. Whitmore 104, another 104 on the buyer speed figure scale in that one. But yeah, going forward, City of Light definitely getting another chance from me, and it'll be interesting. We'll have a good opportunity to talk race design the next time he comes up, and we'll reflect back on this conversation and see how we still feel. All right, let's talk Marley's Freedom. I just felt so silly leaving out Baffert in the end, leaving out Baffert on a big day in New York when, if you filter just for the graded stakes on the biggest days, I mean, it's something like 13 for the last 17. It's insane how well these horses have run, how much they've shown up. And this one just got a trip that didn't really seem to be winning over the course of those 2 days. Being wide throughout, gave ground to everybody in the race, closing into fractions that were coated blue. It was a terrific performance from Marley's Freedom. Ends up with a 121 on Timeform and ends up with a 100 on the buyer speed figure scale. What do you think about her going forward? Any other thoughts on the ballerina?
She was really good. I mean, keep in mind when you see these furlongs, when we go to the Breeders' Cup, one of these is not running at 7. The boys will be running at 6. So this is a better indication of what we'll see moving forward. I mean, I thought she was brilliant. I mean, she ran really well. She kind of exploded, ran away from him. I was a little disappointed. Ivy Bell kind of got a trip that I thought she would like, and Marley's Freedom behind this. I think some people might giggle about that, but when Bath puts him on the plane to run in dirt races on the East Coast, he's got a distinct advantage. He trains them all like soldiers. And the ones that make it through the training, they're pretty stinking good, and they're really stinking fit. And they come over here and they run well, or over there and run well, I guess. And that's what she did. I mean, her figures were good. And you were thinking she was going to improve. Not that Bob Hess is not a good trainer, but the move to Baffert with a sprinting horse that's showing talent, you think the horse could improve. So I thought she was really good. Jake Ballas called me in the morning and said he it's still there was good on, I don't know, whichever one of those things. I don't know what the sheet or paragraph that she was going to run well, and she did run well. So I was surprised by that. Lewis Bay ran pretty good too. Better than I thought she would run, but Marley's Freedom was just too good for him.
Yeah, I thought we had a real shot with Ivy Bell there for a minute. I should be giving props along the way here to the great, not so much you and me, but the great team of guests we had. Sean Tugel made Kidura his best bet. That one made money for a bunch of listeners. And how about the Piper giving out Whitmore right on top? Had many comments, texts, tweets, etc., giving Pipes credit. And it's actually worked out well for Pipes, JK. He's had 2 consecutive big days in a row, had that 50-1 shot in the late picks yesterday. And he's going to be begging us to come back on the show at this point because it's apparently got his head right, and he's closing out this meet in excellent form. I do think we don't get any credit. I don't remember. Did you give out Marley's Freedom? No, none of us did. We don't get any credit for this race, but the crew was pretty good throughout. And Pipes, I mean, he's we're going to have to get him back on here sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I enjoyed. I listened, and he's fun to listen to. So
he's good,
especially because I know him well enough and spend enough time with him that listening to him, I can see the look on his face as he's saying what he's saying, and it's much more entertaining that way.
We'll have to get him on a video podcast at some point. All right, let's talk about race 7, the Personal Ensign. All right, Abel Tasman, awesome filly. She wins 133. 133, is that even right on the time form scale? Just an absolutely huge effort. And the buyer comes back a robust 105 as well. We talked about it at great length. It laid out for the race, didn't quite stack up on numbers, but you knew you were going to get compensated in price, 9-5 as opposed to 3-5, more than twice the price on Elate. JK, what can I say? I'm not surprised that contact in the stretch did not lead to a DQ. That does not surprise me. However, I wish we lived in a world where you're not allowed to come out multiple paths and make contact with a filly, knocking her back onto her wrong lead in deep stretch, and that's the reason you win the race. It's not, to me, dude, it's not right. I think very clearly if she holds a straight path in the stretch, Elate goes right by just like it looked like she was going to. This was not a hang job. This was a muscle job. And I don't think that's how races should be decided. It makes me nuts. I know I might be in the minority on this. I actually haven't heard many people complaining about it. And again, I didn't expect it to happen. It's not like I was shocked. But I don't think it's right, and I wish that jockeys, this race riding thing, I'd rather see the horses decide the race, personally.
So I got a few thoughts. The first word, I think this whole thing, the whole discussion, the whole conversation, it all boils down to one simple word, and that word is inconsistency. The frustrations that we all feel from time to time when this happens, it's because of the inconsistency. And I didn't hear, obviously I wasn't really in tune that evening, but I didn't really hear too much about the Abel Tasman DQ until I heard about the DQ that happened in the 6th race on Sunday. And the reason I think that people were so upset is because they looked unbelievably similar. And one resulted in a disqualification and the other one didn't. The inconsistency between those two decisions, I think, is the biggest issue. It's the biggest problem. It's the biggest frustration for the bettors, is when that light comes on next to a horse that you bet on, you really have this very alone and empty feeling because you genuinely have no idea what's going to happen because there's no consistency. Now, here's what I will say. I think Elate was coming in I think she came in at least a path.
I think she had to come in late. I think she had to come in late to brace for the contact.
And that's fair, but I'm saying I think
the other Philly coming out multiple times.
I think part of the problem with them not disqualifying. Look, if Abel Tasman comes down, I'm not upset. I'm giving the reason as to why I think it happened was a late came down one path. Abel Tasman came over two. So they were both traveling in that direction. Abel Tasman definitely had the momentum and was definitely doing it.
She initiated it
more aggressively and was definitely but I looked at Mike's right hand, and his hand never came off of her mane and within the rein. He never pulled with his right hand to lead her over there. Now, look, he was hitting her left-handed.
Hitting her left-handed. What does it matter what he did with his right hand? I think you make a good point about the inconsistency. Give us your thoughts, JK, if we have you back on the Sunday DQ.
I think that it made sense. I mean, the horse came out, bumped the horse a few times, and I think that it made sense. But based on them not doing anything in the grade one on Saturday, then they needed to not do anything on Sunday. And so that's why I find it to be troublesome. It was a bad DQ based on the precedent they had set less than 24 hours before.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. The consistency is the real problem. And I don't know, they sometimes do those explanations. I didn't hear the full explanation of either. I just saw the incidents. But it would certainly be a good faith situation to have a little bit more information about the thought process and a little more transparency. Hey, this is something we've talked about a couple of times, but I don't think we've talked about it on air yet. When the stewards talk to the jockeys in this situation, is it me or is that ridiculous that they have all this other data? Shouldn't that be what speaks, not anything about which jockey can make a more articulate case or out-lawyer himself in the situation? Shouldn't the data just be the data? Why do stewards speak to jockeys? I don't think it makes any sense. Do you like it? Do you think it's fair?
Look, I'll say this. One of the most educated, jockeys that's involved in advocacy and all kinds of things is Johnny Velasquez. And still sometimes, and he's been here for a long time, and still sometimes when you talk to Johnny, you hear Johnny talking, it's not his first language, and there's words that sometimes get misused or whatever. To me, it's an unfair advantage for someone who had their first language is English to be debating and stating their case with someone who their second language is English. I just don't think it's really fair. I don't think it's a fair situation for them. So
what about the bigger, I agree with what you're saying. What about the bigger point though? Like, should it even matter? Like, why should they be allowed to plead their case when we have the video evidence right there in HD and we can see, like you said, you could see where the right hand is and, that there's mane and what's the jockey adding to the conversation there? Or is it just a way for the stewards to give themselves an out and making a tough decision? Well, he said blah, blah, blah.
Well, the great example we talk about, I think it was at Royal Ascot last year where they showed the inquiry where all three guys came and sat down in the room. I think that there's a sense of, I think that whatever the conversation is should be public. But, for instance, we talk about Kent DeSormo all the time. He's in some hot water for a ride that he had where he was being accused of not finishing through the wire. I didn't see the race, but knowing Kent and seeing some other situations that Kent's done, the conversation doesn't surprise me. But if there's something to be told there, I kind of understand that they're sitting on the back of the animal. They feel things that we can't see. They hear things that we can't hear, and they can explain things that we can't explain. I think it's good information for them to have. If there's an inquiry between Joel and Javier, let Javier say what happened, let Joel say what happened, and then the three stewards can decipher which one is BS and which one is accurate and make the best decision. And so I don't have a problem with it, but I do think it's a little bit unfair to a certain extent when it comes to the language barrier from time to time.
It's interesting. I'd like to. I think maybe you're right. If there was more, if that was as transparent as the video to the end users, to the bettors, maybe I'd have less of a problem with it. I just think it's inherently flawed. I think what's going on with the horse, whatever. We're talking about a betting contest that played out, and we have HD video of the head-on. If you want to let them talk, whether you're going to sort out days or fines or suspensions, I'm fine with that. I don't think their words should affect the betting result.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree, but I think it's intelligent for us as a sport to gather as much information as possible. And when you have the two human beings or three human beings that were sitting on top of the 1,000-pound animals that were traveling at 40 miles per hour that can give some perspective and add some perspective to the story, I don't think we want to eliminate that. I hope that what they're saying is not like the main deciding factor, and I would hope that it's not. But I don't think it's problematic to have them involved in the discussion.
Yeah, it's worthy of future discussion. We don't want to belabor it now. We'll put a pin in it. Maybe we'll get somebody who's been to Stewart School on here and ask that question. I'd like to hear more about it. Let's talk promises fulfilled for a minute, JK. Very impressive performance. This one comes back 131 on time form. We have that half mile coded into the red, but that was a coded in the red I'm sure you were happy about seeing, because this was a case of a horse just throwing down the gauntlet. Comes back 99 on the Beyer speed figure scale, so significantly slower on Beyer than on time form. Which reading of the race do you prefer? What did you think of the performance?
I thought he was impressive. I thought he's been impressive in the majority of his races around one turn. The Woody Stevens, although he was beat, he was impressive. He was obviously impressive at the Amsterdam. I think that Dale Romans and Louis Saez and the rest of the world learned something about this horse, that he just needs to run fast for a long time, and that's his best opportunity to win. I think he's going to be extremely dangerous in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, going 6 furlongs on his home track at Churchill Downs. I think that he's good from 6 to 6.5 to 7, and I think that he's the type of horse that if I could get a future wager on now, I would bet for the 2019 Met Mile. He's tactical. He's gritty. He looked in trouble at the top. He turned horses away. I think he's really, really good.
You'll struggle to find that particular future market, unfortunately. But he is an interesting horse going forward. 10-1 for the Breeders' Cup Sprint. Buy, sell, hold.
Buy.
Okay,
Buy, absolutely. No, I do for sure. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do with Catalina Cruiser after he ran so well in the. I guess that was, I don't know if it was 6 or 7. I think it was 7 furlong race. Maybe it was 6.5. The Pat O'Brien at Del Mar this weekend. I'm sure that he'll show up in that spot, or they might look to stretch him out for the mile. You know, we got to remember the mile is at one turn this year. And look, I wouldn't be surprised if Promises Fulfilled stretches to the mile either. In the business of making a stallion, he won the 7 furlong H. Allen Jerkins. That's a stallion builder in itself. Now to run that back into a Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, I think you're attracting a little bit more commercial value with your ability to get the added distance.
That makes sense. Just real quick before we get out of here, we'll save the Twitter etiquette for another day. Breeders' Cup Classic prices: Mendelssohn 16-1, and I'm scrolling through looking for Catholic Boy. He's got to be lower than that. There he is at 8-1. Do either of those appeal to you?
No, thanks. I think you can get those. I think you can get those on the day. Catholic Boy will. No one's going to fully embrace him yet against Older, against Accelerate, against, hopefully this McKenzie thing works out to be okay. Just crazy idea. Just these other horses. You'll get 6-1 at worst on the day, so why take 8 now?
All right, JK, that's it for this edition of the DRF Players Podcast. Thank you, listeners, always for tuning in, especially this week, to those of you who listened live and had to listen to JK turn into Robot Man for large stretches of the show. But these things happen once in a while, and we will hopefully be back. It's been a while since we had audio problems, so, it's good. It keeps us from getting too big for our britches. I want to thank producer Craig for the extra work he did editing this broadcast. I want to thank Travis Stone and Willie Nile for providing our intro. For more of Willie's music, check out willienile.com. Special shout out again to the guests who gave out so many winners on the Travers card, Sean Tugel and the Piper, Chris Pivoto. Much, much appreciated to them. And that's it. We will be back on Friday looking ahead to the last weekend of the summer meets. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your photos.